Nature really is metal. Prehistoric animals needed to fight in order to capture prey and often to defend themselves, leaving behind incredible behavioral traces in the fossil record. While prehistoric battles like T-Rex versus Giganotosaurus may never have happened, there were plenty of brutal fights in prehistory. This video analyzes ancient animosities from real fossils, discussing legendary showdowns of battling animals from the fossil record. Forget the Jurassic Park duels and learn about how real science tells us about real prehistoric battles. This is focusing less on one-sided predator-prey relationships and more on conflicts that pose serious risk to both predator and prey. It also includes intraspecific conflicts like battling over mating rights and territory. Our honorable mention is kind of cheating, but it's just so cool that I couldn't not mention it. We see modern animals survive dangerous situations and incredible injuries, and dinosaurs were no exception. Have you ever heard of the Parasauralophus that fought a tree? A 2020 study found that the holotype of Parasauralophus walkeri had bone regrowth indicating highly traumatic events in its anterior thoracic region, including damaged ribs and dorsal neural spines. The author suggested that the pattern of injuries could have plausibly been caused by a tree falling on the front of the animal's body, crushing its neural spines and fracturing ribs. Interestingly, the injuries were described as being in an advanced state of healing, indicating that the animal lived for quite some time afterwards. To quote the paper, "It seems likely the animal survived for at least 1 to 4 months following the traumatic event. The injuries do not appear to have been a direct cause of the animal's death." This finding, together with the increasing observations and reports of paleopathologies and hadrosaurids, might suggest that these dinosaurs were able to overcome and survive such massive injuries. Allosaurus versus Stegosaurus. You all knew this would be on the list. There's no way we could make a video about fights in the fossil record and not include the world-famous Wyoming crotch shot. Allosaurus is a theropod known for its high rate of injury, perhaps caused by extreme aggression in an environment filled with deadly herbivores. Allo roamed the Morrison Formation and shared it with Stegosaurus, of course, in addition to sauropods that could crush it with a single blow. This particular fossil was described by Robert Bacher in 2014 and showed an Allosaurus whose pubic bone had been stabbed through. The wound shape and size matched a Stegosaurus thagomizer, or tail spike. Surprisingly, the Allosaurus survived for some time afterwards, but would have been in horrible pain from both the wound and the inevitable infection. If I had to put money on a Stegosaurus and Allosaurus in a fair fight, I'm betting on the bristly herbivore 90% of the time. Stegosaurs had high range of motion in their tails, as shown by a biomechanical study on Kentrosaurus, allowing them to wield their spikes as an effective defense to their side and nearly in front as well as behind them. Approaching one of these animals is like walking up to a gigantic scorpion. You're welcome to try it. Once. This wasn't the only time that Stegosaurus beat up on Allosaurus either. A 2005 study describes a pierced allocaudal, showing that it was stabbed in the tail and healed. And the same study demonstrated that multiple Stegosaurus thagomizers have the ends damaged and partially healed. They were hitting theropods with enough force to break their own tail spikes. No wonder these guys hated each other. But fear not, Allosaurus fans, the line of the Jurassic had victories as well. Bite marks that never healed have been found on Stegosaurus cervical plates, a part of the body with nothing worth eating. This would indicate that an Allosaurus grabbed the plates during a fight that it presumably won, since the Stegosaurus appears not to have survived the encounter. Tyrannosaurus versus Edmontosaurus. T-Rex, the apex predator of Hell Creek. Edmontosaurus, the apex herbivore of the entire dinosaurian lineage. Well, not really. But Edmontosaurus was no pushover, and fossil evidence shows an individual that actually survived an encounter with a Tyrannosaurus. A 2013 study describes an edmontocaudal vertebra with the T-Rex tooth embedded inside of it, and the wound had partially healed over. We don't know how this encounter went down, whether it was a full-on brawl or the more likely option that the Edmonto succeeded in outrunning its predator, but we do know that hadrosaurs were certainly capable of surviving alongside the tyrant lizard king. Another 2013 example showed Edmontosaurus skin impressions that had wrinkled while healing after being shallowly bitten from the side. Likely perpetrator? Again, T-Rex. Tyrannosaurus versus Triceratops is the ultimate archetypal prehistoric duel, the most physically intimidating terrestrial carnivore in the fossil record against an agile, elephant-sized herbivore with meter-long facial swords. They both arguably represent the culmination of their lineages in terms of raw power, and it would appear, this culturally iconic image isn't an exaggeration. HAP 2008 reports a bitten and healed Triceratops horn showing that T-Rex wasn't afraid to tackle their rivals head-on and deprive them of their chief weapons. Although the trike clearly survived this encounter. Triceratops also took the initiative by doing combat damage, as we see with the leg of Lee Rex. This specimen has a partially healed puncture wound in the rear of its left femur that matches the size and shape of a Triceratops horn, indicating it was stabbed from behind. Then there's the infamous dueling dinosaur specimen. As of the time of this video's writing, the theropod and ceratopsian locked in combat haven't been formally described. The herbivore is widely recognized as a young Triceratops, while the identity of the theropod depends on who you ask. Either it's a juvenile Tyrannosaurus, or an adult Nanotyrannus, or something else entirely. Hopefully, future publications will clear that up decisively. Either way, it's a marvelous specimen where both the Tyrannosaur and Trike died while apparently locked in combat. Triceratops versus Triceratops. While the uber-charismatic three-horned giant was clearly capable of using its horns as a method of anti-predator defense, recent research indicates that they first evolved for usage against one another. This would apply to both display and intraspecific combat. Injury patterns on Triceratops skulls match a horn-locking hypothesis, where competing individuals would ram into one another and stab their rivals' frills. Their stout bodies and reinforced necks were perfect for this type of agonistic behavior, permitting shock absorption upon impact. Imagine the noisy clashes of competing elk today with bellows and crashes echoing in the woods. Multiply that by 10, and you've got an idea of what it would be like to witness a Triceratops rivalry being settled. Ankylosaurids versus Ankylosaurids. Take objectively the best superhero, Thor, turn him into a dinosaur, and you've got an Ankylosaurid. Built like bricks fused with sledgehammers, Ankylosaurids are some of the coolest animals in Earth's history. Massive osteoderms? Check. Armored eyelids? Check. Fused vertebrae and caudal osteoderms forming a weapon that would make the Witch King of Angmar weep? Check. And, turns out, they use these weapons against each other. Arbor et al. 2022 reviewed pathologies found in the Ankylosaur genus Zool, yes, named after the Ghostbusters character. Arbor's team found that the injuries were consistent with intraspecific blows aimed at the hips and side, instead of randomly distributed pathologies you'd expect from a typical animal. Interestingly, Ankylosaurid tail clubs don't fully develop until adulthood, which implies that they formed as display and intraspecific competition tools rather than predator defense. As the study points out, they were clearly quite powerful weapons and would have served dual purposes, but may have evolved first as factors in mate choice and competition. Nature is not wasteful, and a structure that was selected for by a specific external pressure may very well have secondary uses. At any rate, seeing two Zool battle it out would be a spectacular show. I must admit, though, that I'm more of an Anodontosaurus fan. The shape of that tail club is just horrifyingly cool. Maybe for extinction I should have some really buff dude use an Anodontosaurus sledgehammer as an actual bone hammer. I'll have to think about that. Pachycephalosaur headbutting is a combat behavior that has gone back and forth in terms of its acceptance in the scientific community. For years, paleontologists debated if their skulls were strong enough, if their necks would break, if their brains would get fried, if they just attacked one another's flanks, etc. Pathology studies within the last decade or so have indicated that dome-headed pachycephalosaurids have injuries consistent with frequent headbutting, while their flat-headed cousins do not. This isn't to say that they never engaged in flank butting. I'm sure that behavior would be plenty useful in territorial or mating rights battles. Again, just because we find evidence of one usage for an anatomical structure doesn't mean it wasn't ever used for anything else. Speaking of ramming, let's go to the ocean to watch mega predators duke it out. Ichthyosaur ramming fights would have been some of the highest energy combats in all of prehistory. A 2019 study found that multiple species of ichthyosaurs, including the giant macropredatory Temnodontosaurus, had pathologies on their jaws and ribs that indicated intraspecific conflicts. They would have fought with a mixture of ramming one another's sides to break ribs and biting rivals on the skulls. I don't know about you, but getting either rammed or bitten by what is essentially a super Mosasaur sounds like a bad time to me. While I'm straying into the realm of speculation for this thought, it is worth mentioning that histology showed that the jaws of the giant ichthyotitan were incredibly strongly constructed. Their bone structure was compared to carbon fiber by Martin Perillo, an author in the 2024 study, and he offered the idea that they could have used that insane jaw strength to ram their prey, or alternatively to open their titanic jaws given the enormous forces involved in doing so. Based on my most recent conversations with Paul de la Salle, the man who discovered Ichthyotitan, the holotype skull would be well over 4 meters long, with the Auscolossus skull approaching 6 meters. Their bones would have to be incredibly powerful to support the movement of jaws large enough to close around an African bush elephant. Sorry, Jerry. Recent Ichthyotitan minimum size estimates for the holotype and Lilstock specimens yield around 50 metric tons at 20 meters, with the Ossei specimens scaling to around 23 meters and 76 tons. The Aust colossus would be 27 meters and 134 metric tons. Keep in mind that those sizes are based on Basanosaurus, and Paul stated that sizes based on Shastasaurus iconiensis are more likely. Shastasaurus scaling yields much higher numbers, which I won't go into here. People on the internet already hate it when I work with primary sources to scale the same fragments everybody else scales, but they especially hate it when I'm right about big specimens. Going back to dinosaurs but staying in the Triassic period, we have Herrerasaurus fighting. Long thought to be a theropod, this Argentinian basal saurischian was bigger than a lion, and apparently wasn't above taking pot shots at its own relatives. The not-quite sauropod, not-quite theropod engaged in intraspecific facial biting, according to Molnar 2001, and the wounds were severe enough to cause permanent bone damage. It may have been suffering an identity crisis after a nucleodistic analysis and just crashed out, processing its feelings through extreme violence. Seems like a Herrerasaurus move, honestly. Steppe lions, spotted hyenas, and cave bears, oh my. A 2010 study found evidence not only for combat between the three Pleistocene superpredators, but active predation. Steppe lions hunted and killed cave bears, and the hyenas at least scavenged on their remains, although it wasn't a one-sided relationship. We also have crushed lions found in bear caves showing signs of being mangled, and evidence that lions would venture into hyena dens and steal bear carcasses. It was a frequent back and forth between the three species, a Eurasian turf war that raged in the background while early humans struggled to survive. That would make a heck of a movie. Did anyone else ever watch Monster Bug Wars growing up? Just me? The show is totally over the top and ridiculous, but it reminds me of this fossil find: Dipleuran chemical predation on springtails. Dipleurans are a form of hexapod arthropod with two caudal filaments and who lack eyes and wings. This species, Electroprogypix alchemicus, was preserved in amber attacking a springtail. But not an irregular old brawl, no sir. This Dipleuran was firing chemical droplets at the springtail, presumably to aid in prey capture. Fossils like this are incredible, preserving both behavior and physical evidence of predator-prey interactions that rock-based fossils alone would never show us. The capture spray is visible in drops, which makes me wonder how rapid the amber deposition must have been to preserve such a split-second moment. I'm sure there are countless varieties of absolutely marvelous invertebrates that were never preserved in the fossil record, but that makes me sad, so I'm not going to think about it right now. Big marine lizards enter the chat with Mosasaur bite marks indicating intraspecific conflict. Multiple specimens of Mosasaurus, along with relatives, show healed bite marks on the skulls that match the tooth profiles of conspecifics. Some specimens were killed by their attackers, and a 2006 study hypothesized that cannibalism was a potential cause. Prehistoric Planet did an excellent job of showcasing this type of fight between aquatic superpredators. Love that show. Can't wait for Season 3 in 50 years. Walking with Dinosaurs 2 should tide us over in the meantime, although it doesn't look quite as polished. Anyway, Mosasaurs are incredibly awesome. Nothing like 40-foot marine lizards with palatine teeth battling out in an ancient ocean. Plus, Duraphagus mosasaurs are a thing. I just think it's cool that the same clade that produced sleek reptilian battleships like Tylosaurus also ended up with forms like Globidens, whose round, peg-like teeth were perfect for crushing shells of mollusks and clams. Nature is awesome, everybody. Don't forget that. Hey, it's Blue Babe, everybody's favorite mummified steppe bison. This incredible specimen was discovered in 1979 in Alaska and was covered with a layer of vivianite that turned it blue, hence the name. Blue Babe was excellently preserved and had cave lion bite marks and claw marks on the corpse, which means that as recently as 36,000 years ago, lions were battling and hunting bison in North America. The fact that Blue Babe wasn't eaten indicates that either he and the lions were suddenly killed before dinner time, or he won that fight and died from his injuries soon after. Famously, the scientist that prepared the specimen ate some of the meat from Blue Babe's neck to celebrate putting it on display in the University of Alaska Museum. Maybe the real cave lions were the paleontologists that made stew along the way. We've mentioned Tyrannosaurs and Ankylosaurs already, but how about pitting the two against one another? Jurassic Fight Club addicts, eat your greedy little hearts out. Tarbosaurus versus Tarkia was a battle that actually took place in Cretaceous Mongolia. Isotopic studies indicate that sauropods and hadrosaurs were Tarbosaurus' main menu items, but it wasn't above attacking more heavily armored prey. A 2023 study analyzed a Tarkia skull that had been punctured by what seemed to be a Tarbosaurus bite. The Tarkia actually survived, although it died of infection later. Whether or not the attacker was killed in their battle or merely driven off is anybody's guess, but it is strong evidence that Tyrannosaurs and Ankylosaurs actually fought like we always imagined as kids. In at least this case, the Enkyosaurids seems to have come out on top. In the short term, anyway. Mammals continue their post-dinosaur scramble with mammoths versus mammoths. Two male Columbian mammoths named Benny and George were discovered in Nebraska in the 1960s. Despite their friendly names, the way they died was anything but cheery. They'd engaged in a high-stakes dispute of some kind and interlocked their tusks in a brutal shoving match. Whether they were fighting over territory or mates is unclear given how their must glands weren't preserved, but one ended up fatally stabbing each other in the eyeball. The survivor wasn't able to extricate himself from the tangled mess of tusks and may have starved to death or been crushed by the weight of his fallen enemy. This normally wouldn't be an issue for Columbian mammoths, which have curved tusks unsuited for stabbing, but each of these individuals had one damaged tusk that allowed for this unique arrangement of stabbiness. We couldn't make a fossilized fight video and not mention the fighting dinosaurs now, could we? Well, we could, but it would be pretty dumb. Velociraptor vs. Protoeratops is the golden poster child for preserved prehistoric combat. The individuals are locked together in death and excellently preserved by what appears to have been a sudden collapse of a sand dune or its ilk. Who the aggressor was is unclear, since the Protoceratops has the Velociraptor pinned to the ground as it's biting the predator's hand in its robust, sharp beak. The raptor had a sickle claw hooked into its opponent's side and seemed to be more interested in escaping than eating. Remember kids, just because an animal eats plants does not mean it's safe to approach. Check out this analysis on which herbivorous dinosaurs would be deadliest to humans if you're interested in learning more about how underrated herbivores are in paleomedia. Excellently preserved dinosaurs have also been found battling mammals. Rapenomus vs. Siticosaurus is another classic, but instead of a sand dune, this specimen was buried by volcanic ash. A long time ago, in early Cretaceous China, a small predatory mammal appears to have attacked a Siticosaurus. But before the battle was concluded, both animals were buried by pyroclastic debris from a nearby volcanic eruption. This resulted in exceptional preservation, with even the articulation of the Rapenomus fingers gripping the Siticosaurus's powerful lower jaw and biting its side. Its left leg was pinned between the dinosaur's thigh and calf, hinting at a violent acrobatic struggle that both sides were doomed to lose. The fossil shows us that smaller mammalian predators weren't afraid to tackle animals twice their size, and combined with other Rapenomus specimens that had baby Siticosaurus inside their stomachs, shows a vicious intraspecific interaction. Now, what could be more extreme of a fight than gigantic living fortresses dueling it out? Not much. Biomechanical studies show that apatosaurian sauropods would be able to move the tips of their tails at least 30 meters per second, a velocity specified by the authors to represent the most conservative top speed. Even using the lowballed figures, the study stated that the pressure applied by a terminal section of the tail traveling at 30 meters per second would be equal to the pressure applied by a golf ball traveling at 88 meters per second, 315 kilometers an hour, or a volleyball traveling at 57 meters per second, 205 kilometers an hour. Those speeds are 196 and 127 miles an hour for my American friends. Imagine getting hit in the head by one of those things. While it wouldn't be fatal for decently sized Therapods or other sauropods, it might just knock a human into next week. The sauropod experts over at SVPOW hypothesized that apatosaurian necks were specially adapted for intraspecific combat. The big animals would have used their necks as battering rams against one another. Pathology reports in other sauropod groups, especially from China, show fractured ribs that may have been the result of other forms of intraspecific combat. Whales versus sharks is another absolutely epic category of prehistoric showdowns. A 2022 study showed that various species of Miocene sperm whale relatives from Peru were frequent targets of the sharks they shared their environment with. Why, you may ask? The physeteroids had enormous fat storage areas, which would have been excellent feeding targets. The sharks could have targeted smaller individuals during life or scavenged bigger whales after death, which seems consistent with the bite mark patterns. If it did turn out to be scavenging though, fear not. Whales and sharks still engaged in brutal combat in prehistoric times. We've all speculated about Leviathan and Ototus megalodon engaging in fierce apex versus apex combat, but haven't found direct fossil evidence of the behavior. This find might indicate that the epic clash actually happened, but keep in mind the photos are not from a peer-reviewed source. This raptorial sperm whale tooth has gouges in it that appear to have come from a large shark, which implies a fight that involved interlocking jaws. It would have been a battle of bites, with both combatants wielding jaws that could end the other. Take it with a grain of salt though, considering the source. We all love the archetypal image of huge crocodilians attacking dinosaurs. While that certainly happened in the Mesozoic, it wasn't unheard of in the Cenozoic either. Meet this partial tibia, which was identified as belonging to an absolutely enormous forest wrassid by DeGrange et al. 2024. The tibia has huge tooth marks on it that appear to belong to the giant caiman Purosaurus. That's a Predator-prey relationship for sure, but we should remember that terror birds could dwarf ostriches and had beaks that could snap a human's neck. It was a predator-eat-predator world out there, even after the non-avian dinosaurs got the high scores on land and vanished. Finally, non-avian theropods versus other non-avian theropods is a broad but hot-button category. Evidence of intraspecific combat has been found in a wide variety of theropods, ranging from Sinraptor to Daspletosaurus to Tyrannosaurus rex itself. They usually consist of facial bites, with some examples embedding teeth in the jaws of their opponents. The famous Allosaurus specimen Broken Jaw, USNM 2315, has a section of the dentary that's missing its teeth and was warped after a severe injury, thought to have been the result of a battle with another Allosaurus. In no well-sampled taxon is intraspecific theropod combat more clearly demonstrated, however, than Tyrannosaurus. T-Rex fought one another a lot, and inflicted brutal injuries that seemed like they should have been fatal. But these Archosaurian apexes could soak up punishment like a Dark Souls boss. Y-Rex, a specimen from Texas, survived having a good chunk of the tail being bitten off. Sue, the most famous specimen of T-Rex, had injuries on its jaws that recent research indicates were likely bite marks that left gaping holes in the bone. But Stan takes the cake. The cause of its broken and healed neck and broken rib is unknown, although it certainly could be due to combat. But we do know that Stan suffered a bite on the brain case from another Rex and survived the attack. He was a beast, and exemplified the dinosaurian version of a prize fighter that absolutely, under no conditions, will ever give up. Tyrannosaurus as a genus seems to have been addicted to extreme violence, whether that was aimed at hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, or other members of their own species. They weren't above cannibalism either. I'm very curious to see if future discoveries will uncover similar behaviors in other megatheropods. I imagine that Crocodiles weren't above a tussle every now and again either. Thanks for diving into this awesome bro analysis of the fossil record with me. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm glad that you watched until the very end. If you enjoy dinosaur combat, you'll want to watch out for when my novel Extinction Obsidian Dawn is released in the fall of 2025. It's an alternate Earth where ancient civilizations like the Aztecs and Carthaginians battle for dominance using psychic bonds with prehistoric creatures. This is the first of many books in the series and features art by the incredible Eittoresco. Please join the channel to support my work. You'll gain loyalty badges and shoutouts at the Raptor tier with early access to videos at the Megatheropod tier. And if there were any preserved fossil fights that I missed, please let me know in the comments so I can reference them in the future. I'm the Vividen, and I'll see you next time.